Welcome to this second lecture in our Introduction to Austrian Economics. In this segment, we're going to be talking about economics as human action. Practically from the start of the Austrian school in the 1870s with Karl Menger, the Austrians have emphasized that in general, the human and social sciences, such as economics, have distinct qualities or attributes and characteristics that are separate from the study of the natural sciences. Economics, fundamentally and essentially, is concerned with human action, and this makes it a subject matter distinct from and different from the methods and techniques normally and frequently used in the natural or physical sciences. This arises because economics has a source of knowledge that neither the physicist nor the chemist nor the biologist, for the most part, has any access of, and that is knowledge of the workings of the human mind. While the natural scientist can only study his subject matter from the outside and attempt to hypothesize as to what is causing the forces of nature to operate the way they do, economics and other human sciences have this inner or introspective knowledge of man, his mind, and how human action, therefore, is distinct from the subject matter of the physical world. As one of the early Austrians, Ludwig von Mises, said, "We can only observe nature from the outside, but we can observe ourselves from the inside. And why should we forego this opportunity when we can do it?" This was particularly developed and formulated by that other 20th century Austrian economist, Ludwig von Mises. He insisted that for the economist, the concept of man is above all else the concept of the being who acts, who has purposes, goals, intentions, who imagines a future, reflects upon a past, thinks about things that he would wish for and desire, and looking at the world around him, discovers the usefulness of things that he comes to call means to attain those ends. And that is how we think about others. It's why Mises said, economics is not about things. It's not about the tangible material objects of the world. It is about men and their meanings. Anyone who wants to deal with economics and the social sciences in general must not look to the external world from the outside, but must look inside. He must search for them in the ideas and the logic of the human mind and the meanings of acting men. This was explained in a rather amusing way by one of Ludwig von Mises's old students from the Vienna days from between the wars. And this was an economist named Fritz Machlup. Back in the 1960s, he wrote an article called, "What if Matter Could Talk?" He imagined a professor standing before his classroom, explaining how the molecular structure of certain elements operate. And a voice suddenly cries out, "You're wrong." The scientist is startled, but assumes that some student is kidding with him, and he goes on with the lecture. And the little voice repeats itself as the scientist is going on with this hypothesis as to why molecules and the various biological substances act the way they do. And the voice says again, "You're wrong." And the scientist realizes the voice is not coming from a student playing a ventriloquist trick, but is coming from the slide under the microscope. And Machlup says, what if matter decided to break its silence and to talk? Rather than observing the physical world, hypothesizing as to why nature may act and interact and its component elements act and interact the way they do, what if nature, molecules, decided now to show that they had consciousness and would tell them why they did the things they did? Is this a source of knowledge that we should ignore? Could we now, in a sense, get inside to the substance of matter that previously had been closed to us? And Machlup said yes, as Wieser had argued long before. The advantage of the scientist in the social sciences is that he can feel and think like the men whose actions he is attempting to investigate. He can talk with other men. He can learn from their experiences. He can ask them about their thoughts and their feelings. He can listen to people's verbal communications. He can read their written documents and words and the things of their mind that they leave from the past. And he can construct mental images and constructs that are attempting to explain the logic and the reasonableness and the intelligibility of why men act the way they do on their own in their relationships with others. If we can have these types of knowledge, why should we deny ourselves of it? That means that economics is not out there, but it is in ourselves. That the logic of economics is at one level the logical structure of how our minds work. And that logic develops the idea of ends and means and weighing alternatives and deciding what to do and initiating the actions that hopefully will bring us to the goals that we desire. The other element in this Austrian approach is what they call, and admittedly other economists call, methodological individualism. And that is, if we want to understand society, community, nations, markets, we must begin with an understanding and an investigation of their elemental components, which are individual men. Society does not act. Communities don't choose. The nation has no goals, but individual human beings do. Men think, men imagine, men choose, and men act. When we use the term society or the market, we're merely using them, if you will, as summary shorthands. A shorthand that captures and encapsulates the cumulative interactions of multitudes of individuals whose composite activities generate the social order as we see it. If we want to understand society, we must begin with the elements that generate society, and that is men and their interactions with others. The other element that the Austrians emphasize as a complement to methodological individualism is methodological subjectivism. Now, this subjectivism does not mean epistemological subjectivism. Do we really exist? Are you some speck on the shoulder of a giant in another galaxy? It doesn't mean ethical relativism. I'm okay, you're okay. It says that our method of analysis, if we're going to begin with individuals, is to attempt to understand, appreciate, and interpret how the actors themselves give meaning and structure to the world around them. This was emphasized by Mises and Friedrich Hayek in an important book that he wrote and was published in the 1950s, called The Counter-Revolution of Science. As Hayek said, the objects of economic activity cannot be defined in objective terms, but only in reference to the human purposes that generate them. Neither a commodity, an economic good, or food or money can be defined in physical terms. It is the meanings that people see in them and assign to them that defines what they are. Imagine if you were an anthropologist and you were traipsing through the jungle and you heard sounds and you pushed aside the brush and there was a village of a tribe never visited by civilized man. And you saw that the tribesmen in this village, never visited before, are in the center of the village and they're jumping up and down in a circle. Why are they doing this? Is it a war dance? Is it a marital ceremony? Is it just a hot day and they're barefoot and the ground is burning their feet? The fact is, we don't know why the actors are doing what they're doing unless we are able to interpret and understand the meanings that they give to their own actions. A man is lying on a table, and another is standing over him with a sharp object in his hand and is coming down towards his chest. How should we interpret this? It depends upon the meanings that the actors see in the other's behavior. If the man lying on the table views the person standing above him with the sharp object as an aggressor, he will attempt to fight him off to protect his own life. But what if the man lying on the table interprets the person standing over him with a sharp object as a surgeon who is holding a scalpel, who must make an incision without an anesthetic to remove an appendix that has burst and is now threatening to kill him? In the first case, he will resist any thrust by the man above him. In the other case, he will attempt to hold himself still, grit his teeth, and bear the pain so the incision can be made to save his life. Unless we understand the meanings that the individuals themselves see in their actions, we don't know how to interpret what they're doing or their interactions with others. Now, what is it that make up the composite elements of any and all human action? This was particularly developed, though not exclusively, by Ludwig von Mises in his theory and science of human action, which he called praxeology. He said that to act, certain elements are always and inescapably present. First, he said there was uncertainty. Why uncertainty? Because to act means that you believe that you can change the future from the way it would be if you did not act or passively accepted it. In a world with absolute certainty, where the future was predetermined and you believed and knew it, then any attempt for you to change it would be futile. The very fact that you attempt to act and to choose demonstrates that you think the future can be different than what it need be, and therefore has an element of uncertainty to it. On the other hand, the future cannot be completely uncertain. There have to be discoverable local causalities. If I turn the switch on the outlet in the wall, the lights go on. If I turn the knob on the stove, the flame starts so I can boil the water for a cup of tea. If I turn the key in the ignition and I pump my foot on the gas pedal, and assuming the engine is working properly, the starter will get the engine going and I can travel to where I want. So there have to be causalities that we can discover in the wider setting of degrees of uncertainty for people to have the ability to act and to believe that they can act for a purpose that will achieve an end that they would desire. And finally, Mises argued that all action involves time, temporality. All action occurs through time and in time, whether it be 7-minute boiling of water to have a hard-boiled egg, or digging a hole in the ground to lay the foundation of a skyscraper that may take months or years to build. Time is inescapable from all human activity. And at the same time, precisely because time is inescapable, in our actions we have to weigh what we value and consider more important in the present as opposed to the future. What are we willing to give up in the present to have something different or more of in the future? And therefore the time valuation that enters into all of our actions and activities. Now, given that these are the inescapable and always present conditions if human action occurs, uncertainty, causality, and time, for a man to want to act, 3 other conditions must be present. And to use the terms that Mises used, what he called felt uneasiness, dissatisfaction with your current or expected circumstances that will occur in the future if you do nothing. In other words, you must want to change circumstances from what they are or will be if you are passive. Second, you also must have what he called an imagined preferred state of affairs. You have to imagine or think that there's a state of affairs that you would prefer, would rather have in existence or come to fruition than the one that would prevail, again, if you did nothing. And third, you must believe, have expectations about that to attempt to change the shape of things to come through your actions, that there are means or methods that could be brought to bear by you to transform those circumstances into the forms that you would prefer. A dissatisfaction with circumstances, a preferred end or goal or state of affairs, and the expectation and belief about useful and applicable means and methods to bring that state of affairs into existence. Only when that occurs can choice occur. Now, why do we have to choose? Why can't we have it all? Well, not just Austrian economists, but all economists would point out that that is because of scarcity. The means are insufficient to serve all the ends, goals, and purposes for which we would like to apply them. If we can't achieve all of our goals, that means that we're going to have to decide which ones we're going to set aside to pursue others, either for a day or forever. And that means that we must take our preferred goals and ends and rank them in some order of importance. If I can't have all, which would I rather have at the expense of others that I value less highly, and I will put aside at least for now? Then we have to decide how to apply those means in the most efficacious and efficient methods and means to get as much out of them as possible, given their quantities and qualities, and our beliefs of the methods to utilize them, to achieve as many of those ranked order of ends as the means will permit us to achieve. This is what the Austrians mean by the logic of action and choice. But again, as I just explained in Mises's little template or schema of the logic of action, unlike many mainstream economists who with their models start with a working hypothesis that individuals have perfect knowledge or sufficient knowledge to always undertake their actions correctly, the Austrians begin at the other end. Each individual's knowledge is limited and imperfect. Error and mistake and disappointment is always possible. The costs and the benefits, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a future lecture, the costs and the benefits are inevitably things that the individual evaluates and decides and imagines and chooses among in his own mind. They're not out there. They're within us. They're only known and experienced in the mind of the individual chooser. The cost of a choice is the alternative foregone. But again, as we'll talk a little bit more later, the only person who knows what you give up to do another thing is you in your mind when you implicitly ask yourself, if I didn't do A, what is the B that I forgo? These things are not open to objective measurement, since they are merely imagined might-have-beens. If I go to the movie theater tonight and I set aside 2 hours and I give up $10 to buy the ticket, what am I foregoing that I could have done for 2 hours instead with my time, and the $10 could have bought me instead? That's only in your mind. And because you chose to go to the movie and you never did the other thing in that frame of time, they remain might-have-beens that are only in your imagination. That doesn't mean they're any less real and are the alternatives and the set of possibilities that you weigh and select from. But they are elements in the mind. They're not out there in physical matter. That is the core element of the Austrian conception of a science of human action and choice. And with that, we will set aside our time to begin our next part next time.